Colonel Sarah Mitchell had commanded units in 4 different states and earned 3 commendations for outstanding leadership. But on a humid August morning in Georgia, she could not get past the security checkpoint of her own military installation. The 3 young soldiers who stopped her vehicle had no idea that the woman in casual civilian attire, sitting calmly in the driver's seat, was about to become their commanding officer, and their decision to deny her entry would become the opening chapter in a transformation that would reshape not just their lives, but the entire future of Fort Reynolds itself. Before we continue, tell us where you are watching from. And if this story resonates with you, please subscribe, because we have more incredible stories coming your way. Sarah had departed from Atlanta before sunrise, taking the early morning drive through Georgia's pine forests in her personal sedan. The highway stretched before her in long curves through the countryside, and she found herself reviewing the briefing materials she had studied for the past 8 weeks. Fort Reynolds was not a desirable posting. The previous commander, Colonel Marcus Wade, had been removed from duty following a training accident that resulted in serious injuries to 2 soldiers, and in the 4 months since his departure, the installation had been functioning under temporary leadership while discipline deteriorated and morale collapsed. She had been selected for this assignment by Major General Robert Chen, who had contacted her directly to explain the situation. "Sarah, I need someone who can rebuild an organization from the ground up without destroying what little confidence remains." The general had said, "You have a talent for identifying systemic problems rather than simply punishing individuals. Fort Reynolds needs that approach right now." Sarah was 38 years old and had never married, dedicating her entire adult life to military service. Her father had been career Army, retiring as a command sergeant major, and her mother had been the kind of military spouse who held communities together through multiple deployments and constant relocations. Sarah had grown up understanding that leadership meant serving others, not commanding them, and she had built her career on that foundation. Her navigation system directed her off the main highway onto a county road leading toward Fort Reynolds' main entrance. She could see the base spread across the valley below, a mid-sized installation housing approximately 3,000 personnel and their families. The facility looked worn even from this distance. Buildings showed signs of neglected maintenance, training areas appeared underutilized, and the general atmosphere suggested an organization that had lost its sense of purpose. Sarah had deliberately chosen to arrive in civilian clothing, a decision that had surprised Major Lisa Chang when they spoke by phone the previous week. "Ma'am, would it not be more appropriate to arrive in uniform?" Chang had asked, her tone suggesting uncertainty about questioning a colonel's judgment. Sarah had considered how to explain her reasoning. "I want to observe how the base operates when people believe no one important is watching," she had replied. "Standards should remain consistent regardless of who might be observing." Now, as she approached the main security checkpoint, she wondered whether her decision had been wise. The guard station looked poorly maintained, its exterior showing dirt and grime, and the surrounding area was littered with discarded energy drink cans, despite prominent signs prohibiting littering. 2 soldiers were visible inside the checkpoint, both displaying the kind of casual attitude that suggested they had never been properly supervised. Sarah reduced her speed and stopped at the barrier. One of the guards, a young woman who appeared to be in her early 20s, glanced up from her phone with an expression of mild annoyance. Her uniform was wrinkled, her hair was slightly longer than regulation standards allowed, and her posture suggested someone who had never been taught proper military bearing. Her name tape read Martinez. Behind her, another soldier was sitting, with his feet propped on a desk, scrolling through what appeared to be social media on his phone. This one wore corporal stripes and looked to be in his mid-20s. His name tape identified him as Jackson. Neither soldier made any immediate move to approach her vehicle or conduct the security procedures that should have been standard at any properly operated military checkpoint. Sarah waited, observing them with the calm patience she had developed over 15 years of service. She had learned early in her career that how personnel behaved when they thought they were not being evaluated revealed more about organizational culture than any formal inspection could uncover. What she was witnessing here confirmed much of what she had read in the briefing materials about Fort Reynolds. After nearly 40 seconds of being ignored, Martinez finally set down her phone and walked toward Sarah's car with the reluctant movement of someone who had been interrupted during something important. She did not salute, did not adjust her uniform, and did not offer any greeting beyond a flat "yeah." Sarah reached into her purse and extracted her military identification card, along with the sealed orders designating her as Fort Reynolds' new commanding officer. She handed them through the window without speaking, interested to see how long these two soldiers would take to understand what they were looking at. Martinez accepted the documents with barely a glance, then did a visible double-take when she saw the rank displayed on Sarah's identification. She stared at the card, then at Sarah, then back at the card again. Her expression shifted from boredom to confusion, though not yet to the understanding that should have accompanied recognition of a colonel's credentials. "Ma'am, this says you are a colonel," Martinez said slowly, as though she suspected some kind of error or prank. "But you are not in uniform." Sarah nodded calmly. "That is correct, Private. I am Colonel Sarah Mitchell, and I am here to assume command of Fort Reynolds. My orders are in that envelope." Martinez turned and called over her shoulder to Jackson, who was still slouched in his chair. "Hey, we have a situation here. This lady says she is a colonel, but she's wearing civilian clothes." Jackson finally stood up, though his movements suggested considerable reluctance. He walked over to the checkpoint window and took Sarah's credentials from Martinez, examining them with more attention than his partner had demonstrated. Sarah watched his face carefully, noting the exact moment when comprehension began to register. His eyes widened slightly as he read through her orders, and she could see him swallow hard. "Ma'am, we were not informed about your arrival," Jackson said, his voice taking on a more respectful tone, even as confusion remained evident in his expression. "The acting commander's office did not send notification that we should be expecting the new commanding officer today." "That is unfortunate," Sarah replied in an even tone. "But my orders are quite clear, Corporal. They are dated and signed by General Chen himself. Is there a problem?" Jackson glanced at Martinez, then back at Sarah's credentials. She could see him trying to determine the appropriate response to this unusual situation. The fact that he was struggling with such a basic decision indicated that Fort Reynolds' chain of command had deteriorated to the point where even simple protocols had been abandoned or forgotten. "Ma'am, I need to verify this with headquarters," Jackson said finally. "Standard security procedure for anyone arriving without advance notification, regardless of rank." Sarah nodded with approval. "That is a reasonable precaution, Corporal. Please, make your call." Jackson disappeared into the guard station to use the phone, leaving Martinez standing awkwardly beside Sarah's vehicle. The young private shifted her weight from foot to foot, clearly uncomfortable now that she had realized she might have made a significant mistake in how she had initially handled this situation. Sarah took advantage of the moment to study the checkpoint area more thoroughly. The security booth was cluttered with personal belongings that had no place in a professional military workspace. She could see fast food wrappers, a backpack hanging on a chair, someone's jacket draped across a filing cabinet, and a logbook that appeared to be several days behind in its entries. The communication equipment looked functional, but poorly maintained, with cables running in disorganized tangles and dust coating most surfaces. Beyond the checkpoint, Sarah could observe portions of the base visible from the gate approach. A group of soldiers walked past wearing uniforms in various states of disarray, one with an unbuttoned top, another with scuffed boots that had not been polished in weeks. None of them seemed to notice or care about their appearance, and none of the sergeants who should have been correcting these deficiencies were anywhere visible. She thought about her previous assignment at Fort Stewart, where she had served as executive officer for 20 months. That installation had been professional and efficient, with standards maintained consistently and soldiers who took genuine pride in their service. The contrast with Fort Reynolds was striking and deeply concerning. This base had not simply lost its direction, it had forgotten what professional military service looked like. Inside the guard station, she could hear Jackson's voice rising with increasing anxiety as he spoke to someone on the phone. "Yes, sir, I understand that, but she's here now." "No, sir, she's not in uniform." "Yes, sir, the orders appear legitimate, but yes, sir, I will hold." Martinez was now standing at a more respectful distance from Sarah's vehicle, her earlier casualness replaced by nervous awareness that she might have significantly misjudged this situation. Sarah decided to use the waiting time constructively. "Private Martinez, how long have you been stationed at Fort Reynolds?" she asked, her tone conversational rather than interrogative. 11 months, ma'am," Martinez replied, standing slightly straighter now. "I was assigned here right after basic training and advanced individual training. And in those 11 months, have you received regular instruction on gate security procedures and proper military bearing?" Martinez's face flushed. "We had some training when I first arrived, ma'am, but it has been pretty quiet since then. Corporal Jackson mostly handles things, and I just follow his guidance." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. This was exactly the kind of response she had anticipated. Junior personnel who had never been properly trained or supervised, developing poor habits because no one in the chain of command had cared enough to correct them. Martinez's shortcomings were not entirely her own. They were the product of a system that had stopped functioning. Jackson emerged from the guard station looking pale and shaken. He approached Sarah's vehicle with considerably more military bearing than he had shown earlier, though his hands were trembling slightly as he returned her credentials. "Ma'am, I spoke with Colonel Henderson's office. They have confirmed your identity and your orders. Colonel Henderson is on his way here personally to escort you to headquarters." Jackson paused, then added in a quieter voice, "Ma'am, I apologize for any delay. We should have been notified of your arrival." "You should have," Sarah agreed. "But the failure in communication is not your responsibility, Corporal. What is your responsibility is the professional conduct of this checkpoint and the training of soldiers under your supervision. We will discuss that more thoroughly later." Before Jackson could respond, Martinez stepped forward with an expression that Sarah immediately recognized as trouble. The young private had apparently been thinking during the phone conversation, and she had reached some kind of conclusion that she felt compelled to share. "Wait a moment," Martinez said, her voice carrying an edge of defiance that made Jackson's eyes widen in alarm. "Ma'am, with all due respect, I do not think you should be permitted on this base without proper uniform and identification protocols. Military personnel are required to be in uniform on installation property, and civilians need visitor passes that must be arranged in advance. Those are the regulations." Sarah felt a surge of professional interest at what she was witnessing. Here was a private, a junior enlisted soldier, attempting to overrule not only her own corporal, but also the direct confirmation from the acting base commander's office, all based on a partial understanding of regulations and what appeared to be stubborn refusal to admit she might be wrong. Jackson grabbed Martinez's arm and tried to pull her back. "Martinez, stand down." The acting commander confirmed her credentials. "She is our new commanding officer." Martinez shook off her corporal's hand, her jaw set in an expression of misplaced determination. "I've been reading the security protocols manual, and it is very clear about uniform requirements. I do not care if someone on the phone said she is a colonel. She is not dressed properly, and that is a security violation. We cannot just allow people onto the base because they have some paperwork and someone vouched for them over the phone." Sarah watched this exchange with a mixture of concern and professional curiosity. Martinez's behavior was absolutely inappropriate, and would warrant serious corrective action under normal circumstances. But she was beginning to understand that Fort Reynolds' problems extended much deeper than individual discipline issues. This young soldier had apparently never been taught the fundamental military principle that orders from superior officers were to be followed, not debated based on personal interpretation of regulations. "Private Martinez," Sarah said calmly, "I appreciate your attention to security protocols. However, you need to understand several things. First, regulations regarding civilian clothing have exceptions for officers traveling in official capacity. Second, your corporal received direct confirmation from the acting base commander's office. Third, and most importantly, you do not have the authority to overrule the chain of command based on your interpretation of policy." Martinez's face reddened, but instead of backing down, she seemed to dig in further. "Ma'am, I'm just doing my job. Security is supposed to be our top priority, and I cannot compromise that just because someone claims authority. Because your commanding officer has arrived to assume her duties," Sarah finished for her. "Private, I'm going to stop you right there before you make this situation worse for yourself. I want you to step back, take a breath, and think very carefully about what you are doing right now." Jackson had gone completely pale. "Martinez, that is a direct order. Step away from the vehicle and return to your post." For a long moment, it seemed like Martinez might actually refuse even that direct command from her immediate supervisor. Sarah could see the conflict playing out across the young woman's face, pride warring with the dawning realization that she had put herself into an untenable position. Finally, with visible reluctance, she stepped back from Sarah's vehicle but did not return to the guard station. Instead, she stood near the barrier arm with her arms crossed, her body language broadcasting defiance even if her words had stopped. Telling and preparing this story took considerable time, so if you are enjoying it, please subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Sarah reached for her cell phone and dialed the number she had memorized for Fort Reynolds Command Center. It was answered on the second ring by someone who identified himself as Specialist Brooks. "This is Colonel Mitchell," Sarah said clearly. "I'm currently at the main gate and I need to speak with Colonel Henderson immediately." There was a brief pause. Then Henderson's voice came on the line, sounding harried and apologetic. "Colonel Mitchell, I just heard about the situation at the gate. I'm deeply embarrassed. We had no information that you were arriving today. There must have been a breakdown in communications from higher headquarters. I'm sending a vehicle to escort you immediately." "Thank you, Colonel Henderson. I appreciate that. However, before you dispatch anyone, I need you to understand that I do not believe disciplinary action against these gate guards would be appropriate at this time." Henderson's surprise was audible. "Ma'am, they prevented you from entering your own base. They followed security protocols as they understood them, albeit without proper military bearing or chain of command respect," Sarah replied. "What they did wrong is a symptom of larger systemic failures. We will discuss this when I arrive at your office, but I want to be clear that I am viewing this situation as a learning opportunity rather than grounds for punishment." She could hear Henderson's uncertainty in his brief hesitation before he responded. "Understood, ma'am. We will follow your guidance on this. I will be there myself in 5 minutes with Command Sergeant Major Williams." Sarah ended the call and looked back at the two guards. Jackson stood at rigid attention now, clearly terrified about the consequences of this incident. Martinez had lost some of her defiant posture and was beginning to look worried as the reality of her situation penetrated her earlier confidence. "Private Martinez and Corporal Jackson," Sarah said, keeping her voice level and professional. "In about 5 minutes, some very senior officers are going to arrive here, and they are not going to be pleased with what they find. What happens next is going to depend largely on your attitudes and your willingness to learn from this situation. Private Martinez, I particularly want you to think about why your actions were problematic, beyond the simple fact that you tried to prevent your commanding officer from entering the base." Martinez swallowed hard. Ma'am, I was just trying to do the right thing, to follow the rules, were you? Sarah asked. Or were you more concerned with being correct than with actually doing your job properly? There is a difference, Private, and it is an important one. Following rules is necessary, but understanding the purpose behind those rules and knowing when to defer to the judgment of your superiors is equally critical. A black SUV appeared in the distance, approaching the gate at a speed that suggested urgency. Sarah could make out 3 figures inside, presumably Henderson, Command Sergeant Major Williams, and someone else from the command staff. This was about to become a very educational experience for Martinez and Jackson, and Sarah hoped they would prove capable of learning from it. The SUV pulled up to the checkpoint, and 3 officers emerged with the kind of crisp military bearing that had been entirely absent from the gate guards. Colonel David Henderson stepped out first, a man in his early 50s with grey hair and the exhausted look of someone who had been carrying too much responsibility for too long. Behind him came Command Sergeant Major Thomas Williams, a tall man with dark skin and the kind of presence that announced decades of military experience. The 3rd officer was a captain whose name tape read Stevens, likely serving on the command staff. Henderson approached Sarah's vehicle and rendered a proper salute. Colonel Mitchell, I apologize on behalf of Fort Reynolds for this completely unacceptable situation. This should never have happened. Sarah returned his salute and stepped out of her car. Thank you for coming personally, Colonel Henderson. I appreciate the response, though I want to emphasize that I do not view this primarily as a failure on the part of these 2 soldiers. She gestured toward Martinez and Jackson, who were now standing at rigid attention and looking like they wished they could disappear entirely. Sergeant Major Williams had walked over to examine the checkpoint area, and Sarah could see his expression darkening as he took in the cluttered interior, the incomplete logs and the general state of disarray. When he turned back toward the group, his face could have cut steel. Corporal Jackson, Williams said, his voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that made shouting unnecessary. Would you care to explain to me why this checkpoint looks like a college dormitory rather than a military security post? Jackson seemed to shrink under his gaze. Sergeant Major, there is no excuse. We have let our standards slip. That is putting it mildly, Williams replied. And you, Private Martinez, did you actually attempt to prevent a full colonel from entering this installation after your corporal had verified her credentials with the acting commander's office? Martinez's face had gone from red to white. Sergeant Major, I was concerned about security protocols, and you were concerned about being correct, Sarah interrupted gently, using the same words she had spoken minutes earlier. There is a difference, and that is what we need to address here. Henderson was looking at Sarah with an expression that mixed confusion with cautious hope. Ma'am, I'm not sure I understand. You are saying you do not want disciplinary action against these soldiers. What I am saying, Sarah replied, is that what happened here this morning is a symptom, not the disease. Yes, these 2 personnel failed in their duties. Yes, their behavior was unprofessional and inappropriate. But they failed because no one taught them better. They behaved poorly because no one has been maintaining standards or providing proper supervision. They made bad decisions because Fort Reynolds' entire chain of command has been broken for months, possibly years. She turned to address Martinez and Jackson directly. I'm going to tell you something that I want you to remember for the rest of your military careers. Leadership failures always roll uphill, not downhill. When junior soldiers do not know their jobs, that is because their sergeants did not train them. When sergeants fail to maintain standards, that is because their officers did not provide proper guidance and oversight. And when an entire base begins to fall apart, that is because the command structure stopped functioning the way it should. Captain Stevens, who had been silent until now, spoke up. Ma'am, if I may ask, what do you propose we do about this situation? Sarah smiled slightly. I propose we use it as the foundation for rebuilding Fort Reynolds. Corporal Jackson, Private Martinez, here is what is going to happen. You 2 are going to work with Sergeant Major Williams to completely overhaul our gate security procedures. You are going to research best practices from other installations, identify every weakness in our current protocols, and develop a comprehensive training program for all security personnel. You are going to become the experts on proper gate operations, and then you are going to train everyone else. Both guards stared at her in disbelief. Martinez found her voice first. Ma'am, you want us to, after what we did, you are trusting us with fixing the problem? I'm trusting you to learn from your mistakes and help ensure no one else makes the same ones, Sarah replied. That is what leadership does, Private. We do not just punish failure, we transform it into growth. But understand this clearly. I'm giving you both one chance to prove that you can be better soldiers than you were this morning. If you waste that chance, there will not be another one. Sergeant Major Williams stepped forward, and Sarah could see a gleam of approval in his eyes. Jackson Martinez, you heard the Colonel. Consider yourselves temporarily reassigned to my office for special project duty. Report to me at 0800 tomorrow morning with notebooks and a serious attitude adjustment. We have considerable work to do. Henderson was shaking his head slowly, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Ma'am, I have to say, that is not how I expected you to handle this situation. I know, Sarah said, and that is part of the problem Fort Reynolds has been facing. Everyone has been expecting punishment and discipline without addressing the underlying causes of poor performance. We are going to change that starting today. She turned back to her car to retrieve her shoulder bag, then paused to look once more at the checkpoint that had inadvertently provided her first real insight into Fort Reynolds' challenges. Corporal Jackson, one more thing. I want this checkpoint cleaned, organized, and operating to full standards by end of business today. Every surface cleaned, every log updated, every piece of equipment inspected and maintained. Can you handle that? Yes, ma'am, Jackson replied, his voice stronger now than it had been since this encounter began. We will have it squared away. Outstanding. Carry on. Corporal. As Sarah walked toward the SUV with Henderson Williams and Captain Stevens, she could feel the weight of what she had just taken on, settling across her shoulders. Fort Reynolds was going to be a challenge unlike anything she had faced before, but the gate incident had given her something valuable, a clear example of what needed to change, and a concrete way to demonstrate her leadership philosophy to the entire base. Henderson held the SUV door open for her. Ma'am, if you do not mind me saying so, that was either brilliant or completely insane. Possibly both. Possibly both, Sarah replied with a slight smile. But we will find out together, will we not? Now let us get to headquarters. I want a complete briefing on every aspect of this installation's operations, and I want it to be brutally honest. No sugarcoating, no excuses, just the truth about where we are and what we need to fix. As the SUV pulled through the gate, Martinez having hurriedly raised the barrier with a much better salute than she had managed earlier, Sarah looked out at Fort Reynolds spreading before her. The base looked tired and neglected, but not broken beyond repair. Like the two guards she had just left behind, this installation needed training, standards, and leadership that believed in the possibility of improvement. The headquarters building was a two-story structure near the center of the base, and even from the outside, Sarah could see signs of the same neglect she had observed at the gate. The landscaping was overgrown, several windows had blinds hanging at odd angles, and the flagpole displayed colors that were wrinkled from improper storage. Inside, the building was functional, but shabby. The floors showed signs of deferred maintenance. Bulletin boards displayed outdated information, and the general atmosphere was one of an organization going through the motions without any real pride or purpose. Personnel they passed in the hallways offered salutes that ranged from half-hearted to nearly correct, and Sarah made mental notes about everything she observed. Henderson led her to what would be her office on the second floor. The space was adequate, but showed clear evidence that the previous commander had not cared much about maintaining professional standards, even in his own workspace. The desk was scarred and cluttered, filing cabinets stood with drawers hanging open, and the American flag in the corner looked like it had not been properly maintained in years. "I apologize for the condition of the office, ma'am," Henderson said uncomfortably. "Colonel Wade left things in disarray when he departed. That much is obvious," Sarah replied. "But I am less concerned about furniture than I am about the state of this installation's operations. Colonel Henderson, Sergeant Major Williams, Captain Stevens, I need you to give me the complete picture. No holding back, no protecting anyone's reputation. Tell me exactly how bad things are." The three officers exchanged glances, and Sarah could see them making a collective decision about how honest to be. Finally, Henderson took a deep breath and began to speak. "Ma'am, Fort Reynolds is broken. Not just having problems, fundamentally broken in almost every measurable way." Sarah sat down in the worn chair as Henderson, Williams, and Stevens settled in around her. The exhaustion in their faces told a story before any words were spoken. Henderson began without hesitation. "Our training completion rates are at 58% when they should be above 90. We have equipment that has not been serviced properly in months. Medical readiness is poor, with nearly half our personnel overdue for required screenings. And morale," he paused, shaking his head. "Ma'am, it is the worst I have seen in 24 years of service." Sergeant Major Williams added, "Colonel Wade's leadership style created a culture where nobody felt accountable for anything. Standards disappeared. When I tried to enforce regulations, soldiers would push back because they knew no one else was being held to those same standards. After the training accident that led to his removal, everyone just gave up." "The accident," Sarah said quietly. "Tell me about it." Henderson's jaw tightened. 2 soldiers were seriously injured during a live fire exercise because proper safety protocols were not followed. The investigation revealed that our training oversight had completely broken down. Wade was relieved, but the damage was done. People stopped trusting leadership entirely. Sarah spent the next 2 hours receiving briefings on every major function of the base. The picture that emerged was of an organization that had forgotten what excellence looked like, but she also noticed something important. These officers were being completely honest with her. They were not trying to hide problems or make excuses. They were desperate for real leadership. Over the following weeks, Sarah implemented her vision systematically. She visited the vehicle maintenance bay and found Sergeant James Cooper working alone, trying to keep an entire fleet operational with inadequate support. She gave him authority to redesign the maintenance program and resources to hire additional mechanics. She met with the medical staff and discovered Dr. Helen Ramirez had been fighting for months to improve healthcare delivery with no support from command. Sarah backed her initiatives completely and enforced appointment attendance policies that had been ignored for years. She walked through base housing and met Elena Rodriguez, a military spouse and community leader who had been submitting maintenance requests for 8 months with no response. Sarah assigned a dedicated facilities team to address housing issues and gave Elena direct access to report problems. At the dining facility, she found Private Marcus Webb, a quiet young soldier who had culinary training but had never been asked for input. She promoted him to specialist and put him in charge of menu improvements. Within weeks, soldier satisfaction with meals increased dramatically, but the most significant transformation happened with Martinez and Jackson. Working with Sergeant Major Williams, they developed a comprehensive security training program that became a model for the entire region. Martinez, who had been so defensive at the gate, discovered she had a talent for teaching others. Jackson found confidence in his ability to lead when given proper guidance and support. 3 months after that August morning, Fort Reynolds underwent its scheduled evaluation. The inspection team, led by Major General Chen himself, spent 5 days examining every aspect of base operations. The results were remarkable. Vehicle maintenance had improved by 60%. Training completion rates had climbed to 85%. Medical readiness was approaching acceptable standards. Gate security procedures were rated exemplary. Most importantly, the evaluation noted that Fort Reynolds had established sustainable systems that would maintain standards regardless of future leadership changes. On the final day of the inspection, General Chen pulled Sarah aside as they walked through the base. "When I assigned you here, I knew you were capable, but I was not certain this place could be saved. You have proven me wrong in the best possible way." Sarah smiled. "I did not save Fort Reynolds, sir. The people here saved it. They just needed someone to believe in them and give them the tools to succeed." That evening, Sarah stood at the same gate where her journey had begun. Martinez was on duty, now wearing corporal stripes, her uniform immaculate, her bearing professional. When she saw Sarah approaching, she came to attention and rendered a perfect salute. "Good evening, Corporal Martinez," Sarah said warmly. "Good evening, ma'am," Martinez replied, her voice steady and confident. "Everything is secure and running smoothly." "I never doubted it would be," Sarah said. "You have come a long way since that morning in August." Martinez smiled, a genuine expression of pride. "We all have, ma'am. You showed us what was possible when someone actually cares about making things better instead of just punishing mistakes." Sarah looked out at Fort Reynolds, now transformed from a broken installation into a functioning military community. Lights glowed in well-maintained buildings. Soldiers walked with purpose and pride. Families gathered in renovated recreational areas. The base hummed with the quiet competence of an organization that had rediscovered its mission. The real test of leadership is not what happens while you are present, Sarah thought, but what continues after you leave. Fort Reynolds had built something sustainable, a culture of excellence that would endure because it was woven into the fabric of how people approached their work every day. 6 months later, Sarah received orders for a new assignment, a brigade command position that represented significant career advancement. As she prepared to depart, the base organized a ceremony on the parade ground. Henderson, now confirmed as the permanent commander, spoke about the transformation Fort Reynolds had undergone. Sergeant Major Williams presented Sarah with a plaque engraved with the names of every soldier who had contributed to the base's recovery. Martinez and Jackson, both now sergeants and training instructors, stood at the front of the formation, their presence a testament to the power of second chances and proper leadership. As Sarah addressed the formation for the final time, she looked at faces that had become familiar. People who had learned to believe in themselves again because someone had believed in them first. "The morning I arrived at Fort Reynolds, I could not get past the front gate," Sarah said with a smile. "Today, I leave knowing that same gate is operated by some of the finest soldiers in our army. That transformation did not happen because of one person. It happened because every individual here decided that excellence mattered and was worth pursuing." As her vehicle pulled away from Fort Reynolds for the last time, Sarah saw Martinez and Jackson at the gate, rendering perfect salutes. The young soldiers who had once tried to keep her out were now honoring her departure with military precision and genuine respect. Fort Reynolds had been broken when she arrived. Now it was whole, functioning as a military installation should, with competence, pride, and unwavering commitment to excellence. The transformation would continue long after Sarah left, carried forward by people who had rediscovered their belief that they could be better than they thought possible. And that belief, more than any regulation or order, was the true measure of what they had built together.